Vincent Frankenstein. Extract 9, Part 3, 1800s. I didn't feel like I had slept, for it seemed that the moment I closed my eyes, John was calling my name and stood in the doorway. "We're here," he said. I rubbed my eyes. "Okay," I replied, and stood up and put my jacket back on. "What time is it?" "About 2 in the morning," he said. I groaned. I followed John to the main deck, where I saw ominous hills and the mountains of a valley and a river running through the middle of the flat valley floor. There were many small villages dotted around the town, and a town surrounding a castle on a small hill. "Where are we?" I asked. "Stirling," he replied. "In Connor's world, this is the capital, and where he coordinates the defences and attacks. We are safe, right? He's not going to suddenly detect us and think it's the Romans. He'll know it's me." John smiled with a wink. There was something unnerving about his smile, like a mischievous boy about to throw stones at passing carriages. "Prepare yourself to see some more wonders," he called as he began to stride excitedly towards the helm. As he moved, the wind caught his coat again, and I noticed another pistol at his hip in a holster. At the helm, he attached himself to the sides of the ears just as he had when steering the ship, and I watched expectantly. After a couple of seconds, there was a soft humming and whirring sound coming from below me. It grew louder and louder until it was the only thing I could hear. Suddenly, a crack cut through the humming and whirring, and at the same time I saw what looked like blue lightning spread across the outer rim of the ship and jolt up through the air to the tip of the balloon. Then the blue lightning vanished, but the humming and whirring continued. In the darkness of night, the strange blue energy was a wonder to behold. As I marvelled, another few seconds passed. I jumped and shielded my eyes as the crack and blue lightning cut across my vision, engulfing the ship once more. This happened several more times, getting faster and faster until it was almost a continuous streak. It became so fast that there was only the shortest of gaps in between each crackle of blue, and the frequency sounded like a continual vuv, almost blocking out the humming and whirring sound entirely. Then, suddenly the cracking reached its peak, and with one final blue lightning bolt that surrounded the ship, I felt my insides twist and turn. I closed my eyes, and the twisting grew until I felt like my whole body had been wrung like a wet towel. The feeling reversed and eased until I almost felt normal, apart from a slight queasy feeling. Trying to ignore the sickness, I noticed that everything had gone very quiet and still. I slowly opened my eyes. I had fallen to my hands and knees. I pushed myself up and put my hands out to steady myself. It took me a second for my surroundings to come into focus, but when it did, I gasped with astonishment. The almost empty valley and hills had completely changed. There were lights everywhere, despite it being night, and as I turned, looking at the carpet of elaborate structures, I felt a lot warmer than I had. The structures and buildings I saw were tall and interconnected by bridges. It was an intricately connected city that must have contained a vast number of people. In the split second I noticed all of this, I turned 3/4 of a circle and came to face the hills. What I saw made me take a step backwards. On top of the hill there was a large metallic tower with an umbrella-like roof stretching out like the petals of a flower. A green tinge spread from every direction of the tower, soaking the night sky. I did not know what this vast green shimmering canopy that stretched across the horizon was. As I began to ponder, a sudden burst of yellow light appeared in the air just beyond the deck. I shielded my eyes with my arms. In the dazzling light there was a loud humming sound. Then other lights and humming sounds came from other points around John's Zeppelin, creating a cacophony of noise that assailed me. As my eyes came into focus, I saw the outline of what was a far stranger flying machine than John's Zeppelin steed. A loud voice cut through the hums. "John, you should know better than to just appear over our capital like that. We nearly blew you out the sky." John's hands were still on the steering bars in the ears. "My deepest apologies. I'm glad you decided not to fire first. I need to see Connor. Is he available?" "Connor has been informed of your arrival and is expecting you. He isn't happy to have been woken." "He never is," John chuckled. "I'll face the consequences." "As you wish," the voice bellowed. "Follow us." With those last words, the lights turned in mid-air, and I saw the flying ship from the side. Its slick angles and curved front looked beautiful, but the turrets and guns I saw showed it was a deadly fighting machine. "You'll need to take a seat or hold onto the rails," John called. As he laughed, the steed lurched forward, and I dived for the table, pulling myself onto a chair as we followed the flying machine at an incredible pace, almost as if we were racing. From the look on John's face, I guessed we were. The other machines, with bright lights that surrounded us, went in a number of different directions, leaving one hovering where it had been. We sped towards a small, lone hill, and on it was one of the largest buildings I could see, a large castle made from a similar sort of metal as the other buildings. To the rear was a large platform with a few differently designed and sized flying machines on it. When we were close, we slowed, and as the noise of the engines and the rushing wind died down, I heard John laughing happily. "You'll learn quickly that these wonderful people love to be serious when necessary, but the rest of the time they enjoy their freedom. To them it's the most precious commodity they have, and to honor it, they celebrate every chance to have some fun." "Fun?" I breathed heavily after the terrifying flight and raised my eyebrows. "Well, I guess there's a fine line between fun and recklessness, but when you fight every day against unimaginable odds, you learn to live in the moment." "I can see why you seem to fit in so well here," I muttered with a watery smile. He laughed and nodded his approval of my jest as he guided the ship down. It didn't take long before it thudded lightly onto the solid structure, and I stood from my chair. My legs were like jelly, and it took me a second to steady myself. "Not used to the change of flying, lad," came a deep, booming voice. I turned to see who had spoken, and there, on a balcony overlooking the platform, was a man almost as large as my father's creations. "Not at all, sir," I replied timidly, and guessed this must be Connor. His hair was black and tied back so it fell down behind the almost invisible gap between his head and back, which could barely be called a neck. The sides of his head were shorn to a fine stubble, and a strong beard crowned his jaw. He wore a loose pale shirt that tried in vain to hide the bulk of muscle underneath, and a green, blue, and black tartan kilt wrapped around his waist and thighs. With my weak reply, he barked a deep laugh. I couldn't tell if it was meant in good humour or derision. I chose to take it in good humour, and smiled up at him as I eyed the two holsters for guns at his hips, and the large sword he leant on as though it was a walking stick. The giant blade should have looked out of place in this strange scientific and technologically advanced place, but the way Connor lightly held the hilt made it look perfectly at home. As the laughter stopped, Connor spoke. "Sir," he chuckled with a shake of his head. "You call me sir? We have no such titles of authority and slavery here. Each man is his own, although we do have a title for those who are suppressed by their own conformity, and that would make you a pomp." "Leave him alone, Connor," John said. "He isn't from here and doesn't know your ways." "You know I'm just testing his mettle, John. I meant no harm to him. To you, however," and at these words Connor drew a pistol with his free hand and shot. I watched in bewilderment, thinking John was about to be hit, but John was just as quick, and drew and shot his pistol in return. There was a loud deafening crackle as the deep blue ball from John's weapon met the light blue of Connor's. As the shots collided, they exploded, and everyone shielded themselves as bits of ice went everywhere. There was a moment of silence, and then echoing laughter erupted from everyone around me. Apparently I had missed the joke, and once again was left feeling very put out by all the camaraderie that was far more garish than I had ever been exposed to. "Come on up, John," Connor called, as everyone around us continued about their business, "and you can explain why you have woken me up at this unnatural hour, especially when I need my sleep to keep me war-ready, and at my best to fight the treacherous dog Caesar and those rats who serve him." With this, Connor turned, and as he did I saw shimmering silver metal around his shoulders that went all the way down his back. It hugged his form so tightly that it looked like it was his skin. He vanished into the giant castle, and after he was gone, John nudged me with his elbow. "Quite a character, isn't he?" "That's one way of putting it," I said, forcing a smile. "You'll get used to him. He's all bark and no bite to his friends. So just be his friend, and you'll be fine." "What happens to those who aren't his friend?" "That, Vincent, you do not want to see firsthand. In his bloodlust, he's on par with the matriarch's brutality." I shivered. "You have nothing to fear, though. Come on." and he patted me on the back and led the way through the door below the balcony. After a quick journey down a corridor, up some stairs, and along a couple of other corridors, we came to a magnificently large hall with stone and metal architecture. Drapes of various tartans hung on the walls, and rows of large benches filled up the hall. The far end was a drop of steps, about a metre down, what had to be the king's table, and place for feasting. The fact it dropped below the rest of the room grabbed my attention, and John must have seen me staring. As Connor said, they have no titles of what we might call honour. They believe such things bind them and elevate those that should serve. The people chose him to lead them because of his honour, and that is enough for them. However, their leaders are always reminded that they should consider themselves below the people they serve, and that it is their job to raise them up to something better. It is a worthy philosophy, I said, after a moment's reflection. That it is, and it's why I love these people so much as I do. Anyway, enough talk. Connor will be waiting, and he doesn't like that if he could be sleeping instead. With that statement, I hastily followed John down the hall to the lowered area and to a side door at the left. John knocked once and pushed it open. I followed him into a spacious but relatively small room, which had a large round table in the centre. Connor sat opposite the door we had entered, facing us with his sword laid across the table in front of him, his hands resting on the blade. He gave us a broad smile and gestured for us to take a seat. So have you finally come to help us in our war against the oppression from Marius and his Roman legions? John sighed. We have been over this 1,000 times, Connor. You know I can't. It would be an honour to join you in battle and support your cause, but this is something I cannot get involved with. There was a long pause, and I could see a deep, strange frustration in Connor's eyes. However, it passed, and Connor barked his laugh as always, which broke the slight tension. You'll have to reject me 1,000 times more, because I won't give up. Some of your resources and mantle could really sway the struggle in our favour. He stopped and shook his head, then continued. So why have you come? I take it this is not just a friendly visit, and it has something to do with this scrawny pomp. My name is Vincent Frankenstein, I said, plucking up all my courage to not let this man abase me with his clearly derogatory term any more. You shouldn't judge me by what you see. I have seen horrors even you might fail to understand. And though I'm not battle-hardened or of great stature, I've had my own fights and have proven my worth. I worried that I had been too brash, but Connor suddenly chuckled and grinned widely once. You have a warrior spirit, Vincent. I can see why John has favoured you with his company. You must forgive me for my harshness. Our nature is to test people with our forwardness to see their worth. It works well. We can tell a fighter from a coward this way. We have a saying, friendship and trust are gifts earned and never given freely. It can be a harsh way to live, but once earned and given, its value is priceless. Isn't that right, John? John nodded. It's an honour to have earned it, Connor. Of course it is, Connor roared, slapping the table with a hand. Don't you forget it. John laughed, and even I chuckled as I started to appreciate and understand this brash but clearly fiercely loyal and honourable man. Now we are on equal footing, Connor said with a slight nod to me before turning to John. What brings you here? We've come for weapons. Weapons? You want weapons? John bellowed. You might as well just come and steal my wife too while you're at it. There was a slight pause. Yet, to make such a request, this must be serious. We'll need some drink, then, won't we? Before John and I could protest, he pushed back his chair and was on his feet and at the large cabinet in the corner. He opened it and hooked 3 mugs on his fingers before swinging up a large keg onto the table. In what seemed like one fluid movement, the mugs were filled and placed before us. Connor returned to his seat and raised his mug. We followed his lead and then proceeded to drink. The moment that liquid fire hit my throat, I coughed and sputtered it back up. I tried not to, but the will to not insult my host was defeated by my shock at such a lethal concoction. Luckily my outburst only made Connor laugh, and John smiled kindly. It takes some getting used to, he said, and I remembered my drinking session with John from when I had first met him. With a final fiery swallow, I decided to leave my drink alone. Yes, we are here for weapons. You know I wouldn't ask for such a favour unless my need was great. John drank deeply, making me shudder. That is true, my friend. I have always said we would help you any way we could. And now I must keep my word, otherwise what meaning does it have? Follow me, and you can select what you need. Connor led us deeper into the castle, and he and John talked about the different weapons John would need. But when Connor asked for details of why we wanted his weapons, John told him he couldn't reveal that information. The huge man was clearly annoyed and wanted his curiosity appeased, but he shrugged it off with a laugh and continued to walk and talk with John as I followed behind. After we were led through several long corridors with many rooms, we came to a door that, from the outside, looked like any other. Here we have one of our many weapons rooms for quick access, just in case we are called to battle. Connor paused and chuckled. Or fancy starting one. The walls to our left, right, and behind were decorated with metallic-looking armour, guns of every shape and size, and devices that would take several pages to describe, and I wouldn't even be able to explain their purpose, as there was no time to ask. In front of us was a long open space with 4 human-like targets at different ranges, all the way to the far end of the room, clearly for testing the weapons. So you want something with extra high electrical output, Connor said to John when the door closed behind us. Then this would be the weapon for you. We simply call it a lightning rifle. You'll understand when you use it. From a wall he lifted a large long-barreled weapon made of finely crafted metal, which looked far superior to John's weapon. He gave it to John, who hefted it, and then proceeded to explain a lot of things about the gun, most of which I did not understand, nor cared to remember. Go ahead, Connor then said, pointing to one of the targets. Apparently John didn't need telling twice, and pushing 2 buttons either side of the barrel to charge it, he turned. The rifle hummed slightly as he did, and then the humming peaked in a whirring sound, and John aimed and pulled the trigger, holding it down for 3 seconds. Lightning rifle was the right term for it. A long stretch of what looked like lightning stretched instantly from the gun to the target, and then, when John released the trigger, the bolt vanished. So had the target. All that remained were ashes smouldering on the floor. I gasped at the destructive power, and wondered if using this on my father's creations was fair. But I knew she had to be stopped, and we had to save Anne, as John had promised. Connor drowned out my thoughts and doubts with his loud voice. That was the highest setting, John, he laughed. I should have turned it down. That setting uses up all the charge in one go, for a last desperate shot against impossible odds. It's worth using, but for longevity it's best setting it at a lower power. Give it here. Connor pulled out a dull grey cylinder from the stock and added another that glowed with light. I'll give you a few charges, so use them well. Connor then took down a second weapon with a shorter and stockier barrel from the wall. He told us it shot a magnetic pulse, and after John had admired and learned how to use it, he fired it for practice, even though it had no effect on the targets as they were not electrically active. The only signs that it had even been fired was the shimmer through the air as the pulse sped to its target, and a slight hum that died when it hit. The last weapon Connor presented was a freeze rifle. That has only been recently invented, Connor said, proudly as he caressed it almost lovingly. I thought the ice shower we received when we arrived was something new, John replied. I take it one of your pistols has been upgraded to this freeze ability. It has, Connor replied with a familiar grin. It works similarly to the lightning rifle, except the balls it fires will freeze whatever it hits if it isn't too hot or designed to counter the shots. This will be of much worth against one of our foes. Thank you for your trust and help, Connor. Please know I would never ask unless I needed it. I know, you old cowboy. Don't go thinking this is a habit, though. I can't just give away these weapons all the time. We have a war of freedom to win here. I know the sacrifices you make. John nodded with understanding. I simply watched, feeling there was clearly history that bound these kindred spirits together in some way, but I was not going to spoil the moment by asking. John then smiled softly, tapped a few buttons on the side of the freeze rifle, and shot at one of the targets. The human-shaped target became coated in a sheet of ice from where the ball had hit. Very effective, John complimented. I bet Marius wishes he could get his hands on this. He never will, Connor said through gritted teeth, and a fire appeared in his eyes that could have melted the ice on the target. With a shake of his head, the fire rescinded. He turned with a want in his eyes towards John. I guess you'll be leaving now. I'm afraid so, my friend. Next time you must come longer and help us beat the Roman scum. I know you have your code of non-interference, unless you have to, but we are 3 weeks away from joining with our allies in vital attacks on some key military positions of the Romans. If we can win and secure them, we might even have a shot on Rome and killing Marius and the Empire for good. What is important to you is important to me, John said. If I can, I will return to see the outcome and perhaps offer tactical advice, but I cannot join in. You old dung mutter, I knew you'd come around, Connor beamed. Just having you here will be of value, and who knows, you might fight by my side. If all goes well, I shall see you at some point before your attacks, John said, ignoring the last comment. However, I have concerns I must attend to, with their own risk, so remember, if I do not show, it is nothing personal. I'll show you back to the flight deck then. Connor took the lightning rifle and a bag full of different charges, while John carried its freeze counterpart, and I was given the magnetic pulse-firing weapon. The walk to John's ship was somber and quiet. Connor had lost all his bravado and seemed like a deflated balloon. We reached the giant horse, put the weapons on board, and gathered by the ladder propped against the side. Connor then turned to me. Take care of John for me. He has more value than perhaps you realize. Watch his back at all times, and watch your own. He hesitated for a moment, before the corners of his mouth curled up in a smile, and he gave a slight nod. You are a quiet one, Vincent, and to not let me push you around earlier shows there is courage and strength in you. I wish you victory in whatever battle you are about to fight. It has been an honor to meet you, Connor. Thank you for your help, I replied simply, not knowing what else to say. Connor then turned to John, and without a word they embraced and slapped each other so hard on the back it probably left bruises, even through the metal plating of Connor's armor. They parted with a reciprocal smile, and turned their backs on each other, John climbing the ladder to his ship, and Connor striding with the prowess of an Olympian god back to his castle. I turned from the image of Connor, and before I climbed up the ship, I noticed a name painted on the neck. Rosemary, it read in ornate script, and I guessed the name must have meant something to John. The time didn't feel right to pry, not with the sense of urgency that cut through the air, and so I resolved to ask him if I got the chance, and climbed onto the Zeppelin. John was already at the front, his hands locked on the bars within the horse's ears that he used to steer. He looked deep in concentration, so I sat at the table and watched the castle drift away from us as we rose. After 10 minutes of flight, we reached a similar spot to where we had come in. One of Connor's flying ships waited there, hovering in the sky. John paid it no attention, and in the same way we had arrived, the device that made us cross over to different universes charged up. It expelled its blue lightning over and over until we suddenly vanished and reappeared in the much darker, plain-looking countryside of valley and hills. I felt nauseous again, but it quickly passed, and the ship turned and began moving fast through the air. With his course set, John came from the helm and sat with me. It's always difficult to leave Connor and his people. What happened to give you such a strong bond? I ventured to ask. That's a story for another time, John said, sitting up straight and seeming to push his nostalgia and reflection aside. It's time to get some more sleep, I think. I've set a course for the American continent, and we should be there in 3 days. We can talk more tomorrow, but I need some sleep. I accepted his reply to my question, and agreeing that sleep was needed, I suddenly felt the keenness of my own exhaustion. It's been a long day, and it was strange to think that that very morning I had been married to Mary. So much had happened since then. I lay down on my bed, and for a few minutes marvelled at the great city I had seen in another universe, but tiredness soon swallowed up those thoughts. 3 days have passed in relative simplicity since that first proper sleep, and I have spent most of my time writing this full account of all that had happened. My thoughts are often of Mary, and if she is well. I miss her dearly, but she is my strength to stay focused and complete this task. I just hope her health is improving. My mind often wanders to dark places and things of the worst. I must have hope that all will be well. It's how she would want me to be. I have also been talking with John and enjoy listening to the many stories of his adventures on different worlds. Some are so fanciful, so strange, that part of me longs to join him. I imagine myself in a leather-long coat and huge hat, steering the horse Zeppelin as we visited many worlds and civilizations. Each time, however, the image of Mary, of my future family and children, burned away such whimsical notions, and I would force myself to push my longing for her to the back of my mind. During a meal of cooked fish and potatoes, I decided to ask him about the name Rosemary. His eyes had welled up almost immediately, and he wiped them quickly as his cheeks reddened and eyes widened in surprise. To see him so overcome with sadness took me by surprise also. He appeared so vulnerable. Before I could apologize, he shrugged his shoulders, and the corners of his mouth rose in a forced smile. "I can't talk about her, Vincent," he replied, "but I'll tell you she is my motivation for all I do, and especially for a mission like this." All I could do was nod respectfully, and continued eating, not knowing what to say, but now understanding why he lived this solitary life. Once we had finished our food, John broke the silence, and was back to his enthusiastic self. We began planning our liberation of Anne, and how we will extinguish the matriarch and the two cruel daughters. We debated long and hard about whether to use stealth or to simply fly the ship into the centre of the town and use the weapons from the top of the deck to destroy the undead matriarch and her two daughters. We have chosen the first, as risking damage to the ship would be too great to cost. John has also theorized that if we kill the matriarch, the undead will no longer be animated when close to her, so she will be our main target. When I haven't been engaged in our battle plans or writing this diary, I have browsed the strange books from his small library and gazed out across the seemingly endless ocean, pondering this wild and tragic journey and all that has happened since my father and I left our home. I have missed him and his counsel this past year, but I hope I will correct his mistakes. I miss Mary too, and part of me wishes she could have joined us, but I am torn with this. My natural tendency is to want to protect her and keep her safe, and perhaps I would have wanted her to stay home even if she wasn't ill. Not that she would have let me, and I see now that this is the right thing. She is strong and more courageous than I am, so why not have her with us? John and I had a good talk about it. "You certainly do not need to protect your wife, or indeed any woman," he said when I told him about how I felt. "Of course there's no harm in wanting to, and even doing it, but not to their detriment and suppression. If we had spent more time with Connor and his people, you would have seen that. Women are fierce, capable, and stronger than your society realizes. If Mary was here, she certainly would have increased the odds of success. More than you, if I'm honest. Not that I don't have faith in you for what is to come, but I can already see she has an inner strength she's learned that you haven't yet." "I know," I replied. "I just get protective." "Well, don't. Do you not think women get protective of men? Women are as capable as men in all things. They just need you men to stop holding them back. I know you are starting to see that since you met Mary, and learned a lot from all she has taught you. But you need to let go of a lot of the false ideas about men and women's roles and strengths. They are human roles, and human strengths." I paused and tried to embed these wise words in my mind and heart. "Thank you for helping me," I continued. "It is not easy, but it is the right thing, and I'm thankful I met Mary, who has opened my eyes to this. We will both do great things by working together, I promise." His words kept me on the right path. I miss her so much, and if there is any way I can hasten my return to her, I will, but not before doing what must be done. When it is done, I can use all that I have seen and learned, and work with Mary to ensure equality is achieved. Assuming I make it through this with my life, of course. But that is enough reverie and speculation. We've crossed the vast ocean and continent, and are nearing the place John fled from. I am nervous for the unpredictability of what will happen. I'm in my room and waiting for his call. It is just after dark, and John has called down to me from the upper deck. It is time to implement our plan.